Good evening, everyone. All right now. Good trouble day. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act commemoration being held here in Washington, D.C. at the historic Thurgood Marshall Trust Center building. We knew that with John Lewis departed, with Reverend Lowry gone, with C.T. Vivian no longer here, that it's up to us in this generation to rise up and to keep the good work, the good trouble that we must all get in to protect rights. It is my pleasure. I am Barber Arnwine, the president of the Transformative Justice Coalition, which is a 5-year-old organization devoted to racial justice. We are appreciative of everyone who is watching and participating in today's program. I'm going to turn this program over to one of our leaders, one of the voices, the visionaries, a person of action and commitment and dedication, someone who has been a rock to the Transformative Justice Coalition, someone who has been a leader in Maryland and throughout this country in the fight for racial justice. He is our master of ceremonies today, and that is none other than the brilliant, amazing attorney, Daryl D. Jones.
Very excited to be here today. Very excited to be here as the chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition. As we've indicated, and as Barber has indicated, the Transformative Justice Coalition is dedicated to fighting for social justice, voting rights, and police reform throughout the United States. This evening, we have a panel and a selection of people that will be presenting, celebrating the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act of 1955, and I will certainly stand and say without question that the panel of folks that we have that will be presenting tonight are second to none. This is a top quality event, top quality, as is deserving of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and on its 55th anniversary. I'd like to now welcome you to our opening prayer and remarks by one of the largest mega churches in America, a president that has worked endlessly and tirelessly in being certain that election protection in churches exists and that people's right to vote throughout America are protected. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Pastor John K. Jenkins Sr., the pastor of First Baptist Church of Glenarden, Maryland. Pastor.
Let us pray. Father, in the name of the Lord Jesus, we are grateful today and thankful for your loving kindness to your people, to your sons and daughters. We thank you for our forefathers and mothers who have endured unjust treatments. We thank you, Father, for those who have stood against those who were unjust and did not walk in righteousness. But God, we thank you that you moved on our behalf and had the voting rights passed and signed by the President of the United States. We thank you and say you're the God that moved on the hearts and in the minds and souls of those who endured challenging moments and times and who stood up for what's right. We pray for this commemorative time, this celebration. We pray, Father, that you would not let this grand occasion, this special day and season to go away without people understanding the significance of what happened 55 years ago. We thank you from the depths and bottoms of our hearts. And we pray this for every speaker and every person and all of the events that will happen over the next few days. We pray, Heavenly Father, that we will continue to march forward, continue to give your name praise, glory, and honor. And I pray this, we pray this in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. We pray, amen. It's my honor as the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Glenarden to take a moment and celebrate this grand occasion. It's a great day. It's a great moment to celebrate the history of what happened 55 years ago. We thank God for those trailblazers and those fathers and mothers who endured challenging moments and times. The problem is that we still have critical and challenging moments and times today with COVID and racial unrest and economic stress. We're still in the midst of challenging times. But these are things that we can do something about. Some of these things we can make decisions and choices to make a difference. And so we want to encourage and speak to churches around the country to step up and stand up. And there's something everybody can do. And what is that? Everybody and every church and every organization can participate in helping vote. The vote makes a difference. And so my role and my responsibility is to challenge churches and organizations to understand the significant role that the church has played, the Black church has played through history. And we should not stop in doing that today. So we encourage you to do what you need to do. Thank God for the young people who have peacefully marched. But we want to tell them, don't stop marching. March right on down to the poll and vote. We want to tell them, get their friends and get them registered and do what you need to do, because your voice and your vote makes a difference. It's my honor to just celebrate what the young people are doing and thank God for what our forefathers have done. The work is not done. We're not finished.
With prayer and those words, as we prepare to hear the next voice, I want you to take a moment. I want you to walk back with me in time. The year is 1965. African Americans, blacks, trying to vote in America are asked to count how many jelly beans as to whether or not they could register. Fannie Lou Hamer, Mississippi, tried to register voters, was beaten, jailed, trying to register blacks to vote. Jimmy Lee Jackson, Selma, Alabama, trying to register people to vote. But sheriff knocked him in the face, knocked him in the mouth, knocked him down. C.T. Vivian knocked him down. C.T. Vivian, the shooting of Jimmy Lee Jackson. As a result of the beating of C.T. Vivian. In Selma, Alabama, John Lewis summons the courage to decide he was going to walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Let's be clear about the time that we're talking about. John Lewis was warned not to do it by the organization that he represented, that he'd be on his own, that he shouldn't do it, as much too dangerous. But he was determined. He was focused. He was determined to cause good trouble because it was the right thing to do. You listen to what's known as the Black National Anthem, lift every voice and sing. I ask that you stand wherever you are. Ayanna Gregory, who is the daughter of civil rights activist, comedian Dick Gregory, will be performing Lift Every Voice and Sing.
My name is Ayanna Gregory, and I stand before you, a daughter of the movement. I dedicate this to our newly departed warriors, Representative John Lewis and the Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian. We thank you, we love you, we honor you. Shout out to the Black Lives Matter movement and every warrior and healer on the front line for justice. We thank you, we love you, we honor you. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sing a song full of the faith that our dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that our present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on until victory is won. Freedom now.
Thank you, Anna Gregory, for that stirring rendition of Lift Every Voice and Sing. I could feel the spirit of Dick Gregory. I could feel the spirit of John Lewis, the spirit of C.T. Vivian, the spirit of all the freedom riders that gave all they had to get to the point of securing voting rights and equality for all Americans. It is my pleasure at this point to introduce and sort of reintroduce a person who has become a very good friend to me, a person who is a mentor to me, that I look up to, that I learn from, and that at any hour I can call upon and be certain that I'm going to receive candid advice. She was the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law and headed that for many years, headed it to the point and took it in directions that I don't know that I'll ever see those heights again. Very difficult to stay where she's taken it. She had taken it to such a point that she was named the President Emeritus of the Lawyers Committee. She now went off and founded the Transformative Justice Coalition, where she is now the president and founder. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce to you, who will then introduce our next trailblazer, Barbara R. Arnwine.
Thank you, Daryl. Thank you so, so much. And I want to say to everybody listening that we are so moved to be walking in the footsteps of John Lewis. Congressman John Lewis was so kind to me and so many others, but he was a personal friend, a deep personal friend of our next speaker. He was, without question, Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson's confidant and friend. I want to tell a story that will tell people how close he was. That in this year, he was able to walk with us in Selma, Alabama. But before he got to Selma, Alabama, he went to Atlanta. Reverend Jesse Jackson detoured from South Carolina and went to South Carolina to make sure that he personally spoke to Congressman John Lewis and got Congressman John Lewis, he picked him up and gave him a ride to Selma by car to make sure that John Lewis would not miss the 55th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. Because Reverend Jesse Jackson knew that when John Lewis, this 23-year-old who had just spoken, remember everyone, at the Great March on Washington in 1963, whose anniversary we're going to be commemorating, all the civil rights groups, everybody who cares about justice. It's going to be here in Washington, D.C. on August the 28th to recreate that amazing march. And he is, without question, doing what needs to be done to make sure that voting rights was a reality. Remember that he would never have given a speech at the in Washington, D.C., at the Lincoln Memorial, but for the fact that he was blessed that Dorothy Irene Height gave up her speaking spot because she wanted to make sure that young people were heard. And she said, I'm going to let this 21-year-old pay for young people to speak. So think about it, everyone. As you look, you see these two posters. They say millennial votes matter. We just 3-day training program. That is TJC, the Transformative Justice Coalition, the North Carolina NAACP, and the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda had a 3-day training program in which we trained 51 young people on voting rights and how to be voting rights champions. And that's what these posters are from our first program in 2016. And we want to dedicate that training program. Reverend Jesse Jackson's going to be with us after we show a beautiful video tribute to Congressman John Lewis. And in fact, on December 6th of last year, he made sure that he came to be the presider over the signing the actual passage by the House of the Voting Rights Advancement Act. It was his courage, part of that action. So we want to show you a beautiful video that is based on that amazing lead that was published by the New York Day. So with that said, here comes the video.
Has died at the age of 80.
We cannot give up now. No. We cannot give in. No. We must keep the faith. Yes. Keep our eyes on the prize. We must go out and vote like we never, ever voted before. Yeah. Go out there. Speak up. Yeah. Speak out. Yeah. Get in the way. Yeah. Get in good trouble. Good trouble. Trouble and help redeem the soul of America. Silence, break the silence, screaming words of hope.
I'll go forward. I'm insecure. Right, you see video, and so they hear you talk. Take off. I got you, I got her. So just give me 1 minute, get her split. I'll be right back to you.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for that video. It was a different video that was produced by Abe Gerkel, and that is the Transformative Justice's video in tribute to the 55th anniversary of the voting rights and to John Lewis. We are so blessed because we have with us right now one of the world's icons, one of the greatest leaders of our lifetime for many of us. He, as I mentioned, stood shoulder to shoulder with John Lewis. He was somebody who taught everybody, right, that we all could be somebody. He was a leader who said to America that he was, no matter what happened, he was always going to keep hope alive. He has marched in countless townships, countless small places and big places. He's been internationally renowned and honored, but he's always kept a heart for the George Floyds of this world. He's always kept a heart for the downtrodden. He's always kept a heart for justice. There is no one living who can light a match that can outshine the mighty star, the supernova star of one mighty Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson Sr.
God, God bless you, Barber. I love you so much. It means so much to all of us. I want to thank the pastor from Glenarden who prayed an awesome prayer. I know it's all, but it seems so, Pastor, we thank you for the prayer today. Sister Gregory, your dad lives in all of us. We march because he marched. I express my thanks to Bob Arnwine, Transformative, a woman of great substance and great strength, and the best tradition of women freedom fighters. We talk so much about Thurgood Marshall, but by his side was Constance Baker Motley. That women always stood on the front shoulders. I should never forget, I was thinking that in 1962, the year before the March on Washington, Leroy Johnson elected senator. He was the only black official in Texas, around the Virginia, one black official in the whole South. He was a superstar, senator from Georgia. Then behind him came Julian Bond, was elected. They would let him have his seat. Took a stand against the Vietnam War. We would come over away. Today I looked at the news and they're talking about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, August 6, 1945. And the day that Bush, the Gulf War, August 6. This is the beginning of democracy in America. This is our July the 4th. In so many ways, 1776 means little to us. 89 years more of slavery. That democracy has no lasting value. Only white male landowners could vote. Whites who were immigrants couldn't vote. Women couldn't vote. Blacks couldn't vote. We have no faith, no confidence, no excitement about Philadelphia democracy, but seminal democracy. Philadelphia written in ink, some written in blood. On this day, Lincoln, when Johnson signed that bill, let us not forget, it was the first time democracy hit America. Blacks to vote for the first time. White women could serve in Jersey in the South. 18 years could vote. They couldn't vote to serve in Vietnam. You couldn't vote on campus. You couldn't vote bilingual. You couldn't vote. Indians couldn't vote. We changed the world this day 55 years ago. We thank God for this day and for those who struggle, make it possible. Let's not forget, the Bible says, we're not ancient landmarks. From 1954 to 1965, 11 years of transformation for America. They changed the apartheid law with the 54 decision, right to vote. Dr. King, he was killed. There was never been a black man in Atlanta, Washington. Let us not forget, there today in Montgomery and Southern Birmingham and Richmond, St. Paul, Minnesota, Newark, New Jersey, San Francisco, Denver. We're on the move. We're not going to stop fighting back because God has blessed us and fight we will. There was a time we used to have to pray for change. Now we can pray and vote for at the same time. Ain't no contradiction between praying and voting. But you mail in, stand in, walk in, don't miss this moment. Be counted. I also want to say as I share this with you today, if you're 18 years old or older, 18 below, you can register and vote right now. Why should you vote at 18? To stop wars, you could be going. Vote for Pell Grants, more scholarships. You call us, you vote where you attend school. Vote with passion, student loan debt reduction. Vote with substance. Your purpose of voting. Right now, the cost of education is so high, it's a disincentive. We intend to change all of that. I want to express my thanks to you, Barbara, when I think about choice between 2 or 3 Black women to be on the ticket. We've never been here before. I mean, if Kamala gets it, Susan can be Secretary of State. If Susan gets it, Kamala can be on the Supreme Court. And we have all these talented women who are now coming to the forefront. It's a great day to be alive. I wish Dr. King could have seen this moment. John Lewis did see it. We thank God for John. We were jail mates and marchers in 1960. I can't speak of John in the past tense yet because John lives. John will live as long as we remember him, and we will not forget the sacrifice, the bloodshed, the price he paid for this day. But today, I think all hats go to Barber Arnwine. Without Barber, we wouldn't do this call today. We have a renewed sense of determination to fight back. Who can win the Senate seat in North Carolina, in South Carolina, in Georgia, in Mississippi. With the power of the turn and blue, where the faith of God has given us the power to change our condition. So my friends, let us stand up and fight back. It's going to be 2 days of magnificent work. Barbara, Almighty, I cannot thank you enough. And the powerful pastor, really, for your prayer. I look at my brothers and sisters. By the way, I have a book, Keep Hope Alive. And actually, what happened was, we were on the road and then the pandemic struck and we promoted. So I'm shamelessly promoting my book today, Keeping Hope Alive. We have so much work to do. And I use this time to reflect, to think, and fight back. God bless you, Barbara Arnwine, and keep hope alive, my sister. Bless you, my darling. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Jackson. Very much appreciate not only your words, but also your commitment to the people of America, your commitment to the working people of America, your commitment to the people that are striving to vote, striving to achieve that piece of America, of the American dream that would make their families whole, to make their families happy, to give them that opportunity to force America to live up to its Declaration of Independence. And I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I endorse, and I ask everybody to endorse, bringing and making August the 6th, 1965, the Day of Independence, because it was the day that America was forced to live up to its Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, I tried to figure out, and we tried to figure out, how do you follow such a trailblazer? How do you follow someone who's internationally renowned? How do you follow someone who's had the opportunity to travel to Libya and bring home soldiers and bring home Americans that were being held? How do you follow that? I can only think of one way. I can only think of one way. Oh, we shall overcome it. We shall overcome it. Can we key up, please, the Rainbow Push Choir, led by Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson Sr.
We shall overcome. Lock on. We shall overcome. We shall overcome.
bring that flag up here. We shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. We're not afraid, we're not afraid, we are not afraid. My Lord, we are not afraid. We're not afraid. We are not today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome. Black and white together, black and white together. Everybody, black and white together. Black and white together. Black and white together. Now. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome. One more time, we shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. Say it till you get warm. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. Let me make this last appeal before we go our several ways to work. Today we were in Milwaukee and spoke to 2 high schools. All high school seniors who are age 18 teachers are eligible to register and vote tomorrow. We're training in each high school about 250 seniors who are not registered, about 100 faculty members, plus the support staff, about 500 people, and all 500 in each school is going to vote tomorrow. So we took a tour this week across the state from Milwaukee to Madison to Oshkosh, right around the state, going school by school, they're raising tuition and low and Pell grants. Every student in this university system, 180,000, are eligible to register and vote tomorrow. If you want more tuition, vote about it. If you want more Pell grants, vote about it. All those high school students under your command, you should register them tomorrow and you should lead them to vote on tomorrow. There are 400,000 students in city community colleges or in technical schools. 400,000. They should vote tomorrow. Say vote. High school students, vote tomorrow on site, same day. Tomorrow is Civics Day. Every 18-year-old, every community college student, every university student, vote your power, vote your hopes, and not your fears. Because tomorrow is not enough for you to vote. Under your command are students by the tens of thousands who need to return the state to democratic leadership. is what democracy looks like. When we love each other, this is what democracy looks like. So, go to work.
And we're back. I hope that you've had an opportunity to enjoy the words of Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson Sr. as I have. If your skin was crawling, as we heard, we shall overcome in the words that followed. You know, the whole focus, much of the focus of the civil rights movement was dealing with the Voting Rights Act and being certain that African Americans and people of color had the opportunity to have their votes recorded and are able to register to vote. Today, 2020, 55 years later, African Americans and people of color are still struggling to protect their right to vote. Whether it's interstate cross-check, where they're making people's names that match and unregistering them primarily in inner cities, whether it's purge by postcard, where they send you some flimsy postcard, and if you don't respond, they remove your name. Or if it's some other method that's being used, shuttering poll places so that you can't get there, changing your poll site without notification. All of this came about beginning in 2013 with the Shelby versus Holder case. And the Supreme Court decided that case. The Supreme Court decided that it was okay to have these states that were previously under pre-clearance to no longer have to pre-clear what they do to suppress voters. And this has been the result. Today, I say that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is on life support. It's not dead, but it's on life support. But I'm so pleased to bring to the mic now a strong voice, person that I call the voting rights champion of America. She's ready to take her gloves off, kick off her heels, and pull off her earrings because she's ready to fight for the American right to vote for everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring back Barber Arnwine.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Everybody, if you're hearing from people who are looking to get on this, we understand that people trying to get on by Zoom are having trouble. There is another link that we're putting in the Eventbrite right now for everyone. We apologize for the difficulties with Zoom, but we're making sure that you can have access, and we know you want to because you're blowing my phone up saying that you want to see this mighty program. So we want to, first of all, thank you, Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson. You know, we love you. You have done everything to make sure that this program is a reality. I want to call to everyone's attention that not only are we holding today's program, but tomorrow we have a national summit on protecting America's vote, or March to the Ballot Box. It starts at 2:00 p.m. Eastern Time, and you can find all of this information at ourmarchtovote.eventbrite.com. I also want to say to those who are writing us saying that you're on your way to the Thurgood Marshall Center Trust at 1816 12th Street Northwest to march with us to Black Lives Matters Plaza, that we're ready for you. Come on down, because we're going to march at 8:00 p.m. promptly. And I heard that some of our millennials are on their way. I know that some of our NAACP peers are on their way. It's time for us to walk in the footsteps of the mighty. What I want to bring to you is a word, a short and dedicated word that you see right now in this day and era, on this August 8, 2020, this is the first anniversary of the Voting Rights Act at which John Lewis will not be present. It is the first one that Congressman John Conyers is not present for. It is the first one that Congressman Elijah Cummings is not present for. It is the first one that Reverend Joseph Smoking Joe Lowry is not present for. It is the first one that Reverend C.T. Vivian is not present for. They all lived long lives, blessed lives, and their entire life after the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights was to secure its blessings and its protections to all. And they did everything they could in their power to keep that act as strong, to enforce it, to make sure that people everywhere were able to vote. Think about this, everyone. When John Lewis sat across that Pettus Bridge in 1965, only 6% of African Americans were registered in some southern states. Throughout the South, it was less than 10%. Within 3 years after he encountered that brutality on the Pettus Bridge, and they beat 600 people senseless, beat him, fractured his skull, and they still came back and marched from Selma to Montgomery. And at the conclusion of that march, President Lyndon B. Johnson made it clear that Congress would enact the Voting Rights Act. During that time, between the day before the Voting Rights Act was enacted on August 5th, as Reverend Jackson says, and that was our real day of democracy. But within 3 years of that passage, what did that act do? We know that within 3 years, black voter registration went from less than 11% to 65% in state after state. We know that African American elected officials were only less than 1,000 in the country. But by the time, 10 years after that act, there were thousands. Today, there's more than 12,000. The Congressional Black Caucus had a total membership of only 6 people. It has over 52 today. That's the power of what you call the Voting Rights Act. And of course, the apex of the act was the election of President Obama. Yes, without the Voting Rights Act, there never would have been a President Barack Obama, because that act opened the doorway. That act made it possible for voters to vote. But people looked at that act and they said, if this is the consequence of it, if the consequence of having a powerful Voting Rights Act is that blacks, Latinos, Native Americans, and Asian Americans are going to have unprecedented power, if this is the consequence, then we got to do something about that act. And what they did was they appointed to the Supreme Court, and the Senate confirmed Chief Justice Roberts, who they knew had a hostility towards the Voting Rights Act, who had worked for 30 years to eviscerate and emasculate the Voting Rights Act. And once he became Chief Justice, it was no accident that in 2006, when the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized, that there was an attack upon that Voting Rights Act by the state of Texas first, and then an attack on that act by the state of Tennessee and the state of Alabama in Shelby County, Alabama, an attack on the act. And the Shelby versus Holder case, which the Supreme Court decided in 2013, the mighty Elaine Jones says it was like saying you got the car of the Voting Rights Act, but you can't have any ignition to turn it on. Because what that case did was it decided that the pre-clearance provisions that were used to stop counties, over 1,200 jurisdictions, 9 states, that had a history of discrimination in voting from enacting any law, procedure, or practice that might have a discriminatory, racially discriminatory impact or consequence. And so think about this, everyone. In the period of the enactment of the act, over 50,000 proposed legislative practices and procedures and changes in voting in those 1,200 jurisdictions, over 50,000 were objected to and stopped. Nobody had to go to court. Nobody had to litigate. Nobody had to wait until somebody was denied the right to vote. People were able to stop it before it happened. And Chief Justice Roberts lived to see his dream, which was to eviscerate that act by saying, no, you can't. You can't have an unequal sovereignty of the states, and this is unfair to these southern states because there's no current history, not enough in my opinion. I don't care what Congress said. Congress said there was plenty of evidence, but I disagree. And so I'm going to hold that the coverage formula that tells all these jurisdictions that they got to get their laws pre-cleared, I'm going to hold that that coverage formula is unconstitutional. As a consequence, the Supreme Court, the majority agreed, and the dissenters said, how dare you? How dare you throw away the umbrella of the Voting Rights Act just because you think people aren't getting wet? This is our reality. And since that time, what have we seen? Rampant voter suppression all over the country. What have we seen? That in this era of COVID, when people are threatened with their with life, whether or not they will live to vote, that they are being threatened that they must go to the polls if they don't want to because this Supreme Court won't protect their rights. Case after case, from Wisconsin, Alabama, Texas, Florida, the Supreme Court has in each of those instances turned its back on voters and said because they don't have the Voting Rights Act, protection in those states like they used to, they have said, too bad. You are going to have to get your way to vote. And at the same time, the president is attacking the Postal Service. At the same time, we know that vote by mail is not a panacea. It doesn't work great for people of color. At the same time that they're stripping and denying money to the states so that they can implement something to secure safety for voters, that this is where we are in 2020. That's why we're having the National Summit on Friday and Saturday. That's why we're marching today and say pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would overrule that horrible decision of the Supreme Court in Shelby versus Holder, make those jurisdictions accountable again and stop them from denying people the right to vote, as Daryl Jones was talking about. Guess what they've done? In the last 5 years, they reduced over 1,200. Did you hear me? 1,200 plus polling sites so people can't vote. What have they done? They have cut early voting in states. What have they done? They've done away with Souls to the Polls Sundays. What have they done? The voters in Florida passed Amendment 4 and said give 1.4 million people the right who were formerly incarcerated to vote. Stop playing around. Give them that right to vote. And the state legislature said, people, even though you pass that amendment by 60+%, that we are going to put and impose a poll tax and say we don't care. We're going to make it hard for people to vote again. And that has made it hard for those 1.4 million people to vote. And the courts have set aside at the highest level. The district court did the right thing and said, Florida, can you tell people what they owe? You're saying they must pay these fees and fines. Can you tell people what they owe? And Florida said, no, we don't know. And the court said, well, how long will it take you to tell people what they owe so that they can vote? And Florida said, well, 6 years. And the court said, you're saying that people are going to be denied the right to vote for 6 years? And Florida said, yes. And the court said, well, that can't happen. That violates every idea of the right to vote in this country. So what we're going to do is say, Florida, you got 21 days. Give people their bills. And if you can't produce a bill, then I'm going to allow people to register to vote. And the court said, that's what I'm going to do. There was appeal to the 11th Circuit, the appellate court, and the appellate court said he's right. It went back down. He did some further proceedings. But then people brought it back to the court, and for some bizarre reason, the court said, we're going to stay his order, meaning we're going to stop his order. And right now, yesterday the briefs were due in that case. Right now, 1.4 million voters in Florida have no clue if they're going to be able to vote this year. Just think about it. I could go on and on, but I won't. But this is the reality. That's why we need you, on the front line. That's why we need you right now in this fight. That's why you must be part of our march to vote. Join us right now. 8:00 p.m. here at the Thurgood Marshall Center at 1816 12th Street Northwest as we prepare at 8 o'clock to march to Black Lives Plaza, to Lafayette Park, because we must continue to walk in the footsteps of Congressman John Lewis. Thank you so much, Daryl. I had to bring a word, and thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Barbara. Now y'all have been told, as they say. You understand the importance of it. You understand the essence of the Voting Rights Act. You understand why we're marching. You understand why we're standing to celebrate the enactment in 1965 of that Voting Rights Act and the importance of it. As we celebrate and go through many of the leaders that brought about the possibility of the Voting Rights Act, one of the people that we inadvertently did not mention that has fallen is the person of Emma Sanders. Yes. And for those of you who may not know, Emma Sanders was from Mississippi. She was a part of what was called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. 1964, They had decided that they were going to go to the Democratic Convention, and they wanted to be seated, and they were denied that right. Emma Sanders, along with Fannie Lou Hamer and many other women of the movement, were instrumental in pushing for inclusion. Emma Sanders, during the Freedom Rides and the Freedom Summer Rides, would house people that were many of the students that would take part in the Freedom Rides. She was a true shero of the civil rights movement. We lost her this year. She will not be with us to celebrate today, is not with us to celebrate today, but we mourn her loss, and we move forward in her spirit. As we move forward in our presentation, I believe we have next a video presentation, and it's powerful. Eventually, we're going to understand what it took to get that initial Voters' Rights Act passed, the commitment, the blood, the sacrifice. Please enjoy this video tribute to Reverend C.T. Vivian.
We're willing to be beaten for democracy, and you misuse democracy in the street. You beat people bloody in order that they will not have the privilege to vote.
Reverend C.T. Vivian first met John Lewis in 1960 at one of several nonviolent strategy workshops taught by James Lawson.
When Jim Lawson came to the city, he began to organize students. We began to understand the philosophy behind it, the tactics, the techniques, how to, in fact, begin to take the blows and still respond with some sense of dignity.
By 1963, Vivian was appointed to Dr. King's executive staff. Dr. King called him the greatest preacher that he'd ever heard. When unrest first erupted in Selma, Dr. King sent C.T. Vivian to the tumultuous Alabama town to be his eyes and ears.
This is not a local problem, Joe. This is a national problem. You can't keep anyone in the United States from voting without hurting the rights of all other citizens. Democracy's built on this. This is why every man has the right to vote, regardless. We're not blinding me with that light.
C.T. Vivian's nonviolent beliefs were tested when he was attacked by County Sheriff Jim Clark. Bruised and beaten, C.T. Vivian says he was never tempted to fight back. This disturbing footage on the Selma courthouse steps captured the attention of the nation.
If we're wrong, why don't you arrest us?
Why don't you get out in front of the camera and go on?
It's not a matter of being in front of the camera. It's a matter of facing your sheriff and facing your... We're willing to be beaten for democracy, and you misuse democracy in the street. You beat people bloody in order that they will not have the privilege to vote.
C.T. Vivian, the epitome of commitment, the epitome of courage, the epitome of what it takes to stand up to injustice. It's my pleasure to bring forward now one of our current ministers who certainly knows that commitment, has demonstrated that dedication, who stands and speaks with a godly voice. You can feel the spirit of truth running through as he addresses everyone at any time. He is the president and senior lecturer of the Repairers of the Breach, also known as the Poor People's Campaign. He's focused and he's determined. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II.
working on the technical difficulties, but Reverend Barber will be with us soon. Don't you dare think that this is over. He will be with us soon. We see people arriving. I wanted to pay a tribute to our millennials who are with us today, to our Gen Zers who were with us for the last 3 days where we did this wonderful training. If you live in the following states, if you're from North Carolina, if you're from Georgia, if you're from Alabama, if you are from Louisiana, Mississippi, if you're going to be working in those states leading up to the elections, then you want to join us because we are scheduling another training event for people between the ages of 18 and 35.
Can you hear me now?
To become leaders. We have the amazing Reverend William Barber with us now.
Can you hear me? Am I okay now? Great. I know this technology is something else. Let me put these earphones on. Hold on a second. Now, can you hear me now? Do you hear me? All right, great. Well, first of all, let me just thank Barbara Arnwine and all of you for gathering today for the beginning of this summit. Our good friend, Reverend T. Anthony Spearman. Also, let me thank always our mentor and our stalwart soldier, the Reverend Dr. Jesse Jackson, who always puts it, if you gotta walk in, stand in, or mail in, go in. There's no clearer place than that, no clear way of saying where we are. I want to greet you on behalf of Repairs of the Breach and the Poor People's Campaign, National Call for a Moral Revival. Barbara, I was listening to you walk through that history from 1965 to now. I want to talk about some history for a few moments, and I want to give you some numbers. I want all of the listeners out there, wherever you are, to write this number down, 2,599. 2,599. And every day from now, I want you to add a day. Tomorrow to be 2,600. The next day, 2,601. That's how many days Mitch McConnell has refused to fix the Voting Rights Act. Today is 2,599 days since June 25th, 2013. The Voting Rights Act could have been fixed June 26th, 2013. The Supreme Court gutted it, but it said that the Congress had the power and authority to fix it. Today, for 2,599 days, Mitch McConnell, no one else, because he literally can put it in his desk drawer and never bring it out. That's the power he has as the Senate leader. 2,599 days, he has engaged in a modern day form of interposition and nullification. Dr. King said that about the Alabama governor, George Wallace, when he said he engages in interposition and nullification. He said, whose lips are dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. And that imagery, that dripping, was really pretty harsh if you unpack the poetry, because it's really a metaphorical way of describing someone that is infested with some kind of rabies. And racism is like rabies. It'll kill you. It's a foaming at the mouth. And Dr. King described George Wallace as kind of foaming at the mouth. He just said it in very poetic language. Well, for 2,599 days today,
Mitch McConnell has refused to fix the Voting Rights Act. This was 3 years before Trump was ever elected that he began this refusing to fix the Voting Rights Act. 2,599 days, 7 years and almost 2 months. He's refused to fix the Voting Rights Act. Now, Strom Thurmond from South Carolina, one of the key architects of the Southern Strategy, along with Jesse Helms and the political scientists, Kevin Phillips, others, Richard Nixon, George Bush's daddy, because he was a part of the development of the Southern Strategy as well, and every person in that lineage from there then to now, it's not just Trump, have used the Southern Strategy. But Strom Thurmond filibustered the Civil Rights Act for 1 day, 24 hours. Civil Rights Act of 1957, not 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1957. Strom Thurmond filibustered it for 1 day. Strom Thurmond from Reverend Jackson's hometown, home, South Carolina. And we call Strom Thurmond a racist. And yet Mitch McConnell has blocked the Voting Rights Act, fixing it for 2,599 days. And hardly ever does anyone refer to Mitch McConnell as a racist. It's almost as though we give him a pass. It's almost as though in this season of Trumpism, we act as though Trump is the only problem. It's almost as though we bypass, because you see, Mitch doesn't use ugly language. Mitch doesn't say crazy stuff most of the time in public. Mitch remains cool and calm, but in his coolness and his calmness for 2,599 days, he has blocked fixing the Voting Rights Act. And because of that, and because of so many other things, so many negative things are happening. A lot of the reason why we don't have what we need in COVID is because Mitch McConnell put bills like universal health care, bills like dealing with the Voting Rights Act, bills like dealing with living wages in his death. In fact, if I had time, I would play you a video. Mitch McConnell doesn't talk like this out in the public because he wants to seem so easygoing, so professional. He wants to be seen as someone who just operates according to rules. But while he's doing that, he's slowly put over 200 judges on the bench. And none of them, we believe, even believe that Brown versus Board of Education is settled law. None of them really support the Voters' Rights Act. All of them support corporate greed, though, and corporate injustice. He's quiet, but he's dangerous. And we've got to pull him out of the shadows. We got to pull him out of the shadows. He's from Kentucky, but he's contaminating the whole country. And he alone has blocked fixing the Voting Rights Act for 2,599 days. He's vulnerable this year. He's vulnerable this year. For 2,599 days, I want to keep that settled that in. I know we marched about George Floyd, and we should have, but for 2,599 days, Mitch McConnell has refused to fix the Voting Rights Act. That's why this past Monday, we launched Stop Mitch McConnell's Mayhem, Madness, and Meanness with the Poor People's Campaign. We launched Moral Monday, marching on Mitch McConnell. We're doing it old style with a New Jack City twist. In other words, if it wasn't with COVID, we'd be there, we'd be sitting in, we'd be putting it on. But since we can't do that, we did call-ins. We had over 200,000 people show up online and over 8,000 calls made into his switchboard in less than 45 minutes and shut it down. And we're going to continue to do it because for 2,599 days, Mitch McConnell has refused to pass the Voting Rights Act. He stood up at John Lewis's funeral, talked about him being his friend. But like Jesus said, there are many who love the tombs of the prophets, but they don't love the prophets when they're alive, because when John Lewis was alive, and since John Lewis has been dead, 2,599 99 days, Mitch McConnell has refused to fix the Voting Rights Act. Now in America, we've been focused a lot on death by police violence, and we should be. We should be. That's ugly. That's horrendous when somebody in our name, in the name of the state, kills someone, Barber. That's terrible. That's haunting. That's horrendous. But did you know that denying voting rights also causes death? There's a death measurement. I'm not talking about people dying to get voting rights. I'm talking about denying voting rights actually causes death, political violence. What do you mean, Reverend Barber? Well, when you deny voting rights, you allow people to get elected in states, for instance, and in the Congress. The Brennan Center says something like 16 seats in the United States House of Representatives probably wouldn't be in the Republican Party's hands if it wasn't for the suppression of the voting rights. In North Carolina, we have a senator named Tom Tillis who won by less than 50% of the vote. Tom Tillis won by 31,000 votes in 2014 because of voter suppression. 100 and some thousand votes were suppressed. So we have people holding office in the United States Congress who probably would not be holding office if it was not for the voter suppression and racial gerrymandering that did not have to be pre-cleared as it was prior to the Voting Rights Act being gutted, that Mitch McConnell has kept that way for 2,599 days. But violence, you said, Reverend Barber, you said something about violence. I did. And this is what I mean. When people suppress the vote, particularly in these states, and they allow these extremist legislators to get elected, while voter suppression is targeted at Black people, the people who get elected using racialized voter suppression end up passing policies that hurt all people. In fact, they pass policies that actually hurt more white people in raw numbers than they do Black people. It hurts more Black people in percentage-wise, but it hurts more white people in raw numbers. And the hurt that they do when they get power because of voter suppression, not because they win elections straight out, is deadly. What do I mean? Poverty before COVID was killing 700 people a day. Poverty and low wealth before COVID was killing 700 people a day. People who get elected through racialized voter suppression, when they get elected, they use their power to block programs to help the poor. They use their power to block passing living wages. If we passed the $15 an hour living wage right now, it would raise 49 million people up out of poverty, and 54% of all African Americans work in jobs that make less than a living wage, and 61% of all African Americans are poor and low wealth. But poverty and low wealth literally kills, according to a study by Columbia University, 700 people a day. So when you engage in racist voter suppression and you allow politicians to get elected that block programs to help poor and working poor people, people die. So voter suppression is connected to death, just like that cop's knee on the neck of George Floyd was connected to death. But here's the difference. The death connected to voter suppression and the policies that the people pass who get elected because of voter suppression, most of that death, you never see it on camera. You just see it in statistics, but it's deadly. If 700 people die every day from poverty and low wealth, every 2.5 minutes, a person dies in America from poverty. And if 61% of African Americans are poor and low wealth, it's a whole lot of death that has nothing to do with people, God calling people's homes. It's a form of political lynching and violent public policy murder. People who get elected through voter suppression and racial gerrymandering also, when you look at the record, vote against affordable health care. They vote against the Obamacare. They vote against universal health care. Every state that is a racist voter suppression state is also a high poverty state and a denial of Affordable Care Act state and a union denying state and a public education cutting state. If you just knew that state was a racial voter suppression state, you would know that it also is, you could surmise, that blocks healthcare. Well, what does that have to do with life and death? Every 6.25 minutes, a Black person technically can die from the lack of health care. How do you know that? Because right now we have 30 million people in this country. It's growing every day, so the numbers have changed. But even before COVID, we had people in this country that did not have health insurance. 30 million. Not even talking about uninsured, just 30 million. 15 million of those are people of color. We know, according to some studies, that somewhere in the neighborhood between 5,000 and 5,600 people die every year from the lack of health care. So if there are 15 million people of color that die from the lack of health care, for every 1 million, 5,600 people die from the lack of health care. And there are 15 million people of color without health care even before COVID. If you multiply 15 times 5,600 and then divide it, you come up with about 6.25 minutes. Every 6.25 minutes, an African-American, a person of color dies. So denial of voting rights is connected to death. And we have to start talking like this. We cannot just be moved by death when it is police violence. We must be moved by death when it is police violence. But we have to also know that more people die from poverty, from low wealth and healthcare in our communities every year than are killed and murdered by the police, even though we ought not ever back up off of challenging police, because that's killing and murdering in our name with a gun and a badge. But we can't ignore this other form of death if we're serious about public policy. Now that's the hard news, but here's the good news. The good news is that now the stones that the builders have rejected have the power to be the chief cornerstones. The current American electorate, 22% of the current American electorate is poor and low wealth. And we have a study coming out next week that will show if you organize poor and low wealth people of every color, race, creed, and sexuality around an agenda, if you just can move 10 or 15% of poor and low wealth people, any state in this country, you can change the outcome of elections, even in the South. Even in the South. Trump, for instance, won in Wisconsin. They claim he won in Wisconsin. There was 250,000 votes suppressed in Wisconsin. Trump won by 30,000 votes. There were 10,000. He won by 10,000 votes in Michigan. 100,000 African Americans didn't vote in Detroit alone. He won in Pennsylvania, all total about 79,000 votes. In those same 3 states, there are 2.1 million poor and low wealth people who did not vote. And when we talked to them, we traveled and crisscrossed this country. Many of them did not, the majority of them did not vote for Trump. They did not vote for extremists. They just did not vote. And many of them say, why? Because they never hear anybody who's running talking about the poor, talking about low wealth. They talk about middle class, and they talk about the wealthy. They talk in neoliberalism terms and not the terms of our deepest moral and religious convictions. And so what people are saying now is we're not going to wait to be talked about. We're a movement. We're going to come together across all these colors and race lines. As Dr. King said, every time at the end of that Selma to Montgomery March, when Dr. King spoke, he said, every time there's the possibility of poor blacks and poor whites coming together, the wealthy, greedy aristocracy sows division. So whenever you see this division like you're seeing with Trump now and you're seeing with McConnell, it is fear. It is the fear of the possibility of poor blacks and poor whites and poor Latinos coming together and forming a powerful political alliance that's been possible for years, but we've never really worked on. All across this country, 10 to 15% of poor and low wealth people right now, organized into a powerful voting bloc, can change the elections. The number of poor and low wealth people who have not voted outdistance the margin of victory of any candidate for the last 2 or 3 election cycles, regardless whether they be president, senate, governor, or legislator. And we can't forget that. We can't forget that John Lewis, for instance, was on the Edmonds Pettus Bridge, but he wasn't there alone. And the movement didn't just start when John Lewis got there. John Lewis came there because it was a movement. He was there, and Brother Belville, they were there in 1963. When other people said, you go to Selma and it's the graveyard, nothing's gonna happen. People have been fighting in Selma since 1920. The Dallas County League of Voters had been fighting. It had been called back into existence by the Courageous Eight, among which included Amelia Boynton. They were the ones that called Dr. King in. They were the one that caused SCLCN. It was a movement there, Barbara, and it had been a movement, and people have been fighting for years. John Lewis was a part of a movement. A movement. Some talk about the bridge, and some are saying you have to name the bridge after the movement and all the people that participated. And then we need to understand that when they got to Montgomery, Dr. King's speech, everybody ought to read it. He laid out why voting rights was connected to economic justice and why there needed to be a coming together of poor and low wealth people. He could see it standing on the steps of the Alabama State Courthouse. He understood the connection between jobs and justice and economic vitality and voting rights. And so must we. We can never forget, even if we go back to 1963, that it was about jobs and justice. That day in 1963 when John Lewis, he was the only speaker that I have read that lifted up maids and sharecroppers, that said to all of the marchers that were there, there's no need for us to be proud because there are millions of our brothers and sisters who are not here. He said to Kennedy, unless we pass a bill that can protect the sharecropper who loses his farm because he tries to register to vote and provides more money for the maid that makes $5 a day in a household that makes $100,000 a year, we have not yet succeeded. Freedom has always been seen in terms of civil rights and economic justice have always gone together. So they must now. And in this moment, we have a possibility. We worked in Kentucky for 3 years, Poor People's Campaign recently as I close. We never endorsed the governor, endorsed the candidate, we endorsed issues. We said the poor and low wealth people from the holler to the hood, from the mountains to the streets of Louisville, you all need to come together around an agenda that addresses systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. We were able to work and get people in so-called Trump countries, working with people from Louisville, black and white together. And when the election was over, a new governor was in place in Kentucky, and they said it couldn't happen. And on the night that governor was elected, he said, I've learned in this election that some things are not about Democrat, Republican, but they are and left versus right, but right versus wrong. And that was a direct quote of the language we use in the Poor People's Campaign. We showed in Kentucky, three of the 5 counties we worked in went for Trump in 2016. They changed in 2018. In the hollows of the mountains, coal miners hooking up with fast food workers that are black, hooking up with coal miners that are white, all over this country. That's why Mitch McConnell for 2,599 days has blocked the fixing of the Voting Rights Act, because he knows the Southern strategy is over, there are cracks in it. And so he's trying to hold on to it for a little bit longer. But now we must have a massive march to the polls. Stand in, as Dr. Reverend Jackson said, walk in, crawl in, however you gotta go in, mail in. Because poor and low wealth people organized around an agenda hold power to transform our politics. And then lastly, Barbara, Mitch McConnell has done everything he can to stack the courts, but we can win in the North Carolina NAACP and tomorrow Monday, 45 minutes after the Shelby decision was decided. The politicians in North Carolina took a bill, Senate Bill 666. Listen now, Senate Bill 666, and they turned it into House Bill 589, and they passed it, and they signed it into law, which was the worst voter suppression we've seen since Jim Crow, some say, and surely since Shelby. And we went to war with love and justice. 1,200 people got arrested. It took us 4.5 years, and we won in the courts. The other day at the funeral, when you heard Obama say, courts say that what they've done is surgical racism, that came out of the North Carolina NAACP versus McCrory case. That came out of the Moral Monday movement. We beat them on gerrymandering and got a judge to say that we have an unconstitutionally constituted legislature. And now the lines have been redrawn. But why did it take us 5 years? Because none of it should have ever been pre-cleared. Should have never been pre-cleared. The gerrymandering should have never been pre-cleared. The voter changes should have never been pre-cleared, but without the Voting Rights Act, they were pre-cleared, and it meant we had to fight in the courts for 5 years and in the street. 1,200 people ended up getting arrested. White and black and brown and native together. But what we're saying to folk now that we won the battle, we've got to use the victory. And so we got to understand as I close that voting rights and voting is not just a political issue, it's a theological issue on two fronts. Number one, whenever somebody tries to suppress your right to vote, they are suggesting you are not made in the image of God. Because in America, we only give the right to vote to people 18 years and older, naturalized in this country. We don't give the right to vote to pets, parakeets, and puppets. We only give the right to vote to people. So as my grandmother would say, when somebody suppresses the right to vote or blocks your voting rights, they are suggesting you're not a people. You're not a person. Therefore, they're suggesting you're not made in the image of God. On just that fact, you ought to vote. Even if you don't like candidates necessarily, even if you don't know all the issues, just the fact that somebody says you're not a person, you're not a human being, you're not made in the image of God ought to make us want to stand up and vote and say, how dare you try to stand in the place of God and demean my humanity. But then lastly, the reason we ought to vote theologically, I've been studying with the Jewish rabbis, and the Jewish rabbis taught me, Barber, and you can use this. They said that in Hebrew, the word for vote and the word for voice is the same word, call, K-U-L, K-U-L, call. That your voice is your vote and your vote is your voice, call. And they say that when you, in the Bible, when you read and say that the prophets use their voice on behalf of God, the word there is call. When it says the prophets heard the voice of God, it is call. And oftentimes in scripture, call and thunder are connected. Now, the voice of God and the voice of the prophet is described as thunder. I want to suggest that there needs to be some thunder at the ballot box this November and this voting season. That our voices and our votes ought to sound like thunder. There ought to be some thunder. There ought to be a sound. It ought to be so powerful that it shakes up Mitch McConnell, and it shakes up every racist, and it shakes up everybody that has blocked health care. Our votes ought to sound and say, we're coming. We're already here. We're not giving up on America. We're not giving up on voting rights. We're not giving up on health care. We're not giving up on what Reverend Jackson and Dr. King and so many others and C.T. Vivian and others fought for, and Rosa Parks and Fannie Lou Hamer. No, if you thought we were going to be quiet, it's just the opposite. Our vote is our voice, and we will sound like thunder because somebody's been hurting us far too long, and we're not going to be silent anymore. And so however you do it, nail it in, stand in, crawl in, walk in, however you go in, let it be like thunder. Let our voices be our vote, and our votes be our voices, because God has said it ought to be. God bless you. Wish I could be on the plaza with you, but I guarantee you I'll be in the ballot box with you, and we will sound like thunder, and we will end this reign of Mitch McConnell being able to block our rights. Today for 2,599 days, we're going to count every day until he's no longer majority leader and no longer able to block the Voting Rights Act. Our voices are our votes, and our votes are our voices. Let us sound like thunder and shake up this democracy. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Barber. Thank you, Reverend Barber. Thank you for those words. Poor People's Campaigns, a repair of the breach, 2,599 days. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to now bring to you a young lady that I've had the opportunity to experience, and I can tell you that without question, this is a lady of substance, of passion, of meaning. Latasha Brown is the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. When we think about the movement of the 60s, coming up to the early 70s, and the commitment that was there. We talk about the youth that were involved in that. Latasha Brown is one of the people that today is representing and pulling together youth to push them to vote, to understand the power of the ballot, to march them to the ballot box, to get them in the streets, get them marching, get them excited, get them understanding why it's important to register, to vote, and to put into place legislators that represent your interests and the best interest of the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Latasha Brown.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom's land. You know, as I sit here and think about that we are 55 years post the signing of the Voting Rights Act, yet in many ways the fight is still going on. And I just want to take a moment to honor those brothers and sisters who I consider the founders of democracy. You know, they were the founders of America that we often hear, and they're saying, well, what did the founders intend? But the founders didn't even intend for any of us to be where we are. Their insight, they didn't even have enough sight or a vision to really be able to recognize our humanity. They didn't even have enough vision to even be able to talk about, make the words even be real. But what I do know is that there were some men and women on the bridge in Selma, Alabama, 55 years ago, that were visionaries, that were Black futurists, that at the end of, they didn't have necessarily government on their side. They didn't have a lot of resources on their side. What they had though, is they had a spirit inside of them telling them that nothing was gonna turn them around. And it actually activated them. And oftentimes when I hear people talk about, that ask me about, you know, people were fighting for the right to vote. Yes, on some level, yes, it was in the context of people fighting for the right to vote, but it was really about Black folks literally standing and forcing the recognition of their humanity. That literally it was about us standing in our power, being able to demand of a government that literally we are going to make decisions to impact our communities, that we're going to fight for our right to vote so that we are influencing, that not just we're participating, but we're influencing the policies that impact our people, that we want to reduce the harm that is happening to us, that we need our voices to be heard because any decision made about us has to be with us. And so we have to really be able to shape where we are in this moment and be reflective. As I think about, you know, today, I think there's kind of like three ways that I'm thinking about today. The first thing is I think we have to be reflective. I think we have to be reflective of what has happened, what happened 55 years ago, and even before that. And we really recognize that there's an ebb and flow of movement, that we will recognize that Amelia Boynton actually had started organizing around voting rights in the 50s, right? It was in 65 where things came to a head, but we have to recognize that we're in protracted struggle. And what that means is we have to continually to build blocks, not just when it's an ebb and a flow, not when the cameras are gone or when there are not people in the streets. We've got to do the work that we're actually building the infrastructure to engage our people. We also have to recognize that there's a difference between mobilization and organization, that ultimately, yes, there are these moments where we mobilize folks. I always say the way that I think of movements, I think about movements like I think about the ocean. If you go in the ocean, a good navigator, I'm not a driver of a captain of a boat, but a good navigator knows where the current is, but there's always a current in the ocean. And so sometimes a current is higher, closer to the top, sometimes it's deep, but there's always a current. And the goal is to actually get where the current and go in the current and build from that. And so I think that we have to recognize this moment that we're in right now, that in just the last few weeks, what we have seen in the last few months, we have seen the largest demonstration, multicultural, multiracial, intergenerational uprising in all 50 states in this country. Y'all, that's a lot of power and that's a lot of energy, but the mobilization and the seeing of that is not enough. The question is now, how do we take that and literally be able to use that and create organization so that fundamentally what we're doing is sustaining the movement and not being transactional, but transformative. You know, even when we think about the Voting Rights Act from 1965, those that were there will tell you that that act was never the end all and the be all. That was a compromise based on where it was at that point, right? Even when we look at it, the mere fact that we're saying you got to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act every 25 years, imagine if we had to vote on reauthorizing the Constitution every 25 years. People would think that was ridiculous. The same thing, we have to really be able, which leads me to our next point. The next point is we have to radically reimagine this nation. I ask people, and I ask you all right now, those of you that are listening to me, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for a second. Take a moment and just close your eyes. And I'm going to ask you a question. My question to you is, imagine America without racism. What do you see? I'm going to ask you to open your eyes. I can guarantee you, and I'm not seeing many of you, but I can guarantee you the vast majority of you could not see anything. And I'm raising that because how in the world are we going to eliminate racism when we can't even envision a nation without it? And so I'm going to come to you, particularly the young folks that are out there. I want you to shift the strategy of thinking about who you are, not just as a citizen, not as a voter, but you are the founders of a new America. You are founders of what we have to have, where we are living in the nation that we deserve, and a nation that our rights, our humanity is respected, a nation in where we don't have to have using our tax money that to literally use things against us, a nation that we don't have to be fearful of the police killing our children, a nation in which we don't have children that are placed in cages like they are animals, and we're acting like we're okay with that. The bottom line is we are the founders, and you are the founders of a new nation. And so I'm hoping today that leads me to my third thing, that I'm hoping today that as you reflect and as you radically reimagine what this nation, all the power and the potential that this nation can be, that you take the moment to really recharge, that at the end of the day, it is hard work and we're in protracted struggle, but we've got to recommit ourselves and recharge ourselves in this moment to create that nation that we all deserve and that we all envision, and take some time to envision that. And in doing so, I think it's really important for us to recognize that our people are hurting right now. That as we're talking about voting, we can't talk about voting when our people are being devastated by COVID-19 right now. We can't just talk about voting when we got 40 million people without jobs right now. We can't talk about voting when 68% of Black women in this country are hourly wage workers, right? And we know that they have been the first right now to take the economic hit. We can't talk about voting in a box. We have to talk about voting as a leverage, as a power tool to really be able to get the policy that we need. But our conversation about voting has never supposed to be about participation, even though the media has framed it that our voting is about participation. No, our voting is about power. And we have to be unapologetic about that. Not only has God empowered us, but literally we have to stand in that power. Don't back away from it. And it is up to us. Not only are we going to free Black folks, but we're going to free America. We're going to free America from its own racism. We're going to free America from its own homophobia. We're going to free the world. It says, the scripture says that the last will be first and the first will be last. I believe that with every fiber in my being. My grandmama used to say it all the time. I didn't know what she was talking about, but I get it now. And I raise that because I think it's really important for us to have this conversation around when we're talking about voting, that we're not talking about just voting. Part of the reason why we named our organization Black Voters and not Black Votes Matter is because there's a whole bunch of people that care about Black votes, but don't care about Black voters. We center Black voters because it's the people that matter, that you matter, not because you vote, you matter because God created you, that you have a spirit, that you have your humanity, and your voting is you demonstrating your agency. If anybody is going to make a decision about me, I need to be a part of that decision. If there are any decisions that are going to be made about our community, then we have to be a part of that. So we also have to see that, and not let this space around the voting rights movement, that we see people, those men and women saw something greater, that they were tapping into a greater power. They did not have the resources that others had. They did what many thought was impossible, but they did it because they had a certain spirit and belief that what they were fighting for is the recognition of their humanity, that what they were fighting for is not just for democracy for themselves, but for democracy and for all of us. And so in that, you have to see your charge, that you have that charge now, that we are in this moment. Like we could have been in any other moment, but we are in a defining moment. Everything has been exposed in this country. When we think about it, think about what folks have told you about good savings and when you are financially stable. We're taught, or at least I was, that you're financially stable, that you have to have a savings for at least 6 months to a year. This country that brags on itself for being the wealthiest in the world couldn't even sustain her people for 2 months. Well, the truth of the matter, she could have sustained her people for 2 months if she cared about the people, but we've allowed ourselves to let the health of this country be based on the health of the stock market, not the health of its people. But you can change that. We can collectively change that because we are the visionaries. It will not happen. I can guarantee you, it will not happen that we wait on Mitch McConnell or any of those other white racists, and I'm calling them white racists because that's what they are. You walk like a duck, talk like a duck, you're a duck. So ultimately, what I think is important for us to do, though, is we've got to stand in our power as voters, but also engaging and organizing and see what life is calling of us right now. We are being called to our highest good. We're being called right now that every single system in this country has been exposed. When we're looking at the financial system, we see the weaknesses in that. Right, the infallible, wealthiest country in the world, and we're seeing all the weaknesses of that. We're seeing the weaknesses of the banking system. We're seeing the weaknesses of the criminal justice system. We're seeing the weaknesses of the healthcare system. So all of those things that on one hand, while we see how traumatic and how terrible it is, what I do know is that wherever there is pain, there is always promise. And so in this moment that is creating great pain for our people, and this moment that's created great pain for all of our folks, we should be inspired and on fire, just like Reverend Barber got me on fire over here. I thought I was tired till I heard him talking. I started sitting up a little straighter. And then I was like, well, I got to sing a song, like, because my spirit was moved, because ultimately that is what we got to capture, the hearts, the minds, the imaginations of our people, y'all. We can't just let this be a conversation. I know that I'm going to say this and it's going to be controversial to somebody, but I wouldn't be me if I didn't say it. We've got to have this election cycle and really know that this is bigger than Biden, that this isn't just about Biden. I can tell y'all about what happened in Alabama. In Alabama, in the Doug Jones, Roy Moore race that happened in 2017, where there was a Senate race where you had this Democrat that held the seat and then the Republicans had held the seat for 20 years. What happened that black people showed out? We didn't show out because Doug Jones, we ain't no Doug Jones, y'all. Matter of fact, Doug Jones had commercials that were on TV that were actually offensive to black folks because he had a Union soldier, a general coming out, a Confederate general, and then what it said was that he wanted to be like them and had to be compromisers because he was referring to the Great Compromise. I hope some of y'all know what the Great Compromise, what the big compromise was. Just research that so you'll know what really was the compromise. It was us. But I'm saying that we had to shift the focus from the candidate to the people, that we literally had to organize around this election ain't about the Democrats, it ain't about the Republicans, it is about us. And so once again, I think we're on the eve that we're going to have to organize our people in creative ways around this election cycle, because we don't need to act like this is just a regular election, right? We're literally coming up against fascism. Right? We've got to recognize that there's an unraveling of democracy right now. We've got to know what it means, the danger of what it means when you have a white nationalist in office. Those of us from the Deep South, we know what that means. We know what the call, we know the call and the rallying cry right now. We hear the dog whistles. And so as I get ready to, just to close out, I just want to say thank you to all of you all, from Reverend Jackson. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for the contribution that you have done and that you are still on the battleground. Just to even see your name on here, I'm inspired because I know that you've been doing the work. So we ain't even got tired to be tired. And I'm tired, but I ain't even got tired to be tired, right? So I'm tired to be tired. But the last thing that I'll say is, in our reflect, reimagine and recharge, that in this moment, that we have to really know what time it is. And if you pay attention to what's happening around us, the people will tell you, the people want something different. It's up for us to organize and take advantage of this opportunity. Just as Reverend Barber said, there's a crack, there's a crack, y'all. When there's a crack, you got to get in there. Like when that's that crack, that little crack in the wall, you got to get in it. You got to push through. You got to push through for the liberation and love for our people. So thank you, Sister Barber. Thank you for all the work that you've been doing and you've been leading. Thank you, Helen. Helen has been on the front lines of the work that you've been doing in Georgia and talk about voter suppression when it wasn't sexy to talk about voter suppression. And you've still been working through that process. And all of the brothers and sisters that are doing the work, know that you are appreciated, you are valued, and you are loved. This is our moment, y'all. We've got to stand in our power. And the election, November 3rd, it ain't gonna end. It's going to be the beginning of something different. We got to get prepared, get our people prepared for this moment and take advantage of it. Peace and blessings. And I wish all of you all wellness in this moment.
Thank you, Latasha Brown. We appreciate those words, that encouragement. We appreciate what you do in the field. We appreciate what you do in organizing and bringing young people in to stand up and to be acknowledged and to recognize their voting rights. We want also to take a moment for you to hear from another champion that's involved in the voting rights movement out of Georgia. I'm going to certainly warn those that are watching by live stream that the live stream is going to end, but it will continue on a separate live stream. So you'll have to connect to the new live stream to continue. Out of Georgia, we're very pleased and blessed to have with us the person of Helen Butler, who is the CEO of the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. It's an organization that was founded by Reverend Dr. Joseph Lowry, who is one of the lieutenants for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's our pleasure, our distinct pleasure, to introduce for a couple of words, Miss Helen Butler.
Well, thank you. And to Barbara and everyone, it's so great to be here. You've got the map, you've got the plan. All I can say is, what will your legacy be? Being from Georgia and from Atlanta, Atlanta is known for being the Black Mecca, where there's opportunity for Blacks to thrive and progress. It has the largest Black caucus in the United States. It has a mayor who has Black girl magic, but it also has 5 Presidential Medal of Freedom recipients. And it, to me, though, it is a place where we have some of the greatest civil rights foot soldiers, leaders, legends that have fought for us to have that magnificent piece of legislation called the Voting Rights Act that prohibited poll taxes, that prohibited literacy tests and other discriminatory practices. But guess what? The March for Freedom, Jobs, Justice, it continues, and voting rights continues. But I was so honored to have been around so many of the giants. Just 5 years ago at Wheat Street Baptist Church, along with Reverend Jackson, along with Barbara Arnwine, and so many others, Dr. Lowry, Ambassador Andrew Young, also John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis. We were all there. We were trying to commemorate and develop a plan of action for how we can make sure voting rights are protected forever. But guess what? We're still doing that. But I can say, because of that, because of so many of those civil rights people that were there in the fight for freedom, for justice, for jobs, for voting rights, I want us to remember and say their names tonight. 3 Presidential Medal of Freedom recipients: Reverend Dr. Joseph Eccles Lowry, Dr. C.T. Vivian, Congressman John Robert Lewis, those foot soldiers, Abbott E. Love, Rita Jackson Samuels, Juanita Abernathy. So many unsung heroes that have built the foundation for us. We're working on a solid foundation, and all we have to do is carry it through. One of the great legacies of all three of the civil rights leaders that we've lost this year, they all worked on voting rights, but they all left us a legacy of endurance, perseverance, and working with young people. You have the Joseph and Evelyn Lowry Institute that focuses on young leadership. You have Dr. C.T. Vivian's Leadership Institute as well. And of course, we saw the last thing that Congressman Lewis did was visit the Black Lives Matter Plaza, where we're marching to tonight, where he highlighted young people. And I want to leave with us one of his quote from his message that he left for America, saying that we could become the soul of America. And what he said was, when historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burden of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. And he said, so I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. And as Dr. Lowry said to us at the People's Agenda, we have to be the chaplains of the common good, because voting is a sacred right. And to the people of color, Black people, it is a moral obligation. So what will your legacy be in this struggle to ensure that we continue to enjoy our right to vote?
Thank you so much, Helen Butler, CEO, the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. We here at the Transformative Justice Coalition are very proud of a group of 51 students out of North Carolina and Georgia who now have been at Maryland that have now undergone a very rigorous training on how to not only register people to vote, but more importantly, how to encounter and overcome voter suppression throughout the United States. I'm going to ask Reverend Dr. T. Anthony Spearman, who is the president of the North Carolina chapter NAACP, to please be recognized and present the certificate. Reverend Spearman.
Thank you, Councilor Jones. Good evening, everyone. It has been a wonderful, wonderful evening of celebration. And I know that those of you who are getting ready to march are eager to do so. So just allow me to do what I have been asked to do tonight, and to say to you that over the past 3 days, I've had the unique opportunity of observing a highly motivated class of nearly 55 candidates who engaged in a top-of-the-line virtual leadership training module designed by the Transformative Justice Coalition. Without fear of contradiction, I assert that our march to the ballot box in North Carolina and Georgia and states beyond will be stronger as a result of these informed Gen Zers and millennial voters. And on this, the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, we are proud to present this certificate of achievement to each of our candidates. And in the words of the late Congressman John R. Lewis, we too urge each of you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. And may the force of the ancestors and the God who gave each of you life propel you to your highest potential. And make sure you take yourselves to the polls and take 5 or 10 others with you to the polls. Thank you for your participation in the virtual leadership training module. God bless you and heaven smile upon you.
Thank you, Reverend Spearman. Thank you, Reverend Spearman. Congratulations to that graduating class of Millennial Vote Matters and Gen Zers. Congratulations to you all. As we now begin to prepare for our march from here, the historic Thurgood Marshall Center Trust down to Black Lives Matter Plaza, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank everyone for tuning in, to listening. Encourage you to join us both Friday and Saturday for our continued summit as we drill down even more deeply on many of the issues that you've heard presented this evening. If you are around in the DC area, this is the time now to come to this historic Thurgood Marshall Center Trust. As we are about to begin to march, I'm going to turn to Sister Barber Arnwine to give us our marching instructions and to give us our charge.
Thank you, Daryl Jones, being our great MC for this entire evening. We are so grateful for your leadership of the Transformative Justice Coalition. Thank you. As we get ready to march, everyone, we're going to march down 12th. We're going to march up S. We're going to turn and march down 16th Street to Black Lives Matter Plaza. We invite you to join us during this route and to join us as we march. I want to pay tribute to the 2 of our millennials who were part of our training, who have joined us for this march. I want to thank everybody who has helped to put today's program together and all of those marvelous, amazing speakers. Thank you, Reverend Jesse Jackson. Thank you, Reverend Barber. Thank you, Helen Butler. Thank you, Latasha Brown. Thank you, every single person. My pastor, John K. Jenkins Sr., from First Baptist Church of Glenarden. Thank you, everybody. We're getting ready to march in the John Lewis tradition. We're getting ready to go, and I want everyone to know that this program does not end tonight. Now, a number of young people have written me and said, how do they apply for our next class of Gen Z and millennials between the ages of 18 and 35? You can go to votingrightsalliance.org, and you're going to find a lot of great organizing information there. And you can go to Transformative Justice Coalition, not only on Facebook, but we are also on Twitter at TJC_DC. And you can follow us at VRA Matters, and you can follow me always at Barb73. We can't wait for tomorrow. We can't wait. We're going to march, but tomorrow we reconvene at 2 o'clock. And this old problem with the Zoom link is going to be fixed. Nothing can stop us. Nothing's going to turn us around. We're going to fight until justice is won. We're going to fight until the VRA is totally, the Voting Rights Act is totally amended. Not until the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is passed will we even hesitate for a second in this long march to justice. Thank you, everybody who's come out. to be part of this. Thank you to our drummers who are about to take us all the way into the park. We are grateful and we are ready. Our charge is never to stop fighting for justice, never to lay down, never to withdraw, never to retreat, always to advance, always to move forward. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act celebration.